When looking at shipwrecks, you generally see them as singular events, a wreck sitting alone on the bottom, regardless of the depth. There are relatively few cases of two wrecks in close proximity. Aside from crowded anchorages like Truck Lagoon in the Pacific. And even in those cases, finding wrecks touching each other is even less common, which is what makes the wreck of SMS Cormoran such an interesting case. I've previously covered the later Kormoran, the ship that sank HMAS Sydney. And I've covered this Cormoran as well, but in a larger video looking at multiple wrecks. Today we'll be looking specifically at SMS Cormoran, and to a lesser extent, the wreck that fell almost on top of her, Tokai Maru, a Japanese freighter from the Second World War. These two wrecks from different world wars are touching each other. You can place a hand on both of them at the same time. Two world wars, two shipwrecks, and by some twist of fate, they came to rest right beside each other. Let's look at how that happened real quick before getting to the wrecks themselves. I've covered this story in detail before in an older video. I'll link that for those interested in the full story. The short version is this. SMS Cormoran began her life as a Russian freighter, the Ryazan. This ship had been built in a German shipyard in 1909, but she spent most of her life in the Pacific, first on cargo duty for the Russians, along with sometimes serving as a small ocean liner. In most circumstances, the ship would have served and then been forgotten, probably scrapped a couple decades into her service if she was lucky. However, the Great War intervened. When this broke out in 1914, Ryazan was captured in short order by the far more famous SMS Emden, making this small Russian liner one of her first prizes, and the first Russian prize taken by the Germans on August 4th of 1914. Emden put a prize crew aboard and brought Ryazan back to German colonies in China. Ordinarily, she would probably have been used as a transport, or alternatively, sold off once in port. However, there was an exception here, because the Germans had a cruiser in dry dock at the same time, that being SMS Cormoran. That ship was an old unprotected cruiser dating back to the 1890s. She was in dock for extensive overhaul. So extensive, in fact, that the ship was left in place. It would be impossible to bring her back to service quickly, and even if she was, the ship was obsolete, even slower than the new Russian prize ship. So the crew from Kormoran was put aboard Ryazan, which was promptly renamed to SMS Cormoran in honor of the cruiser. Furthermore, she also received the main battery of her namesake ship, 8 single 10.5 centimeter or 4.1 inch guns. Now an auxiliary cruiser, the newly renamed Kormoran was sent out to do some raiding. Except that wouldn't happen, because soon after she left, on August 10th, 1914, the Japanese declared war on Germany. That came on August 23rd, 1914. Kormoran, at sea by this point, had to avoid the Japanese, and the Australians as well. Her captain, recognizing the issue and in need of coal, sailed for neutral American Guam. By the time she arrived, the crew was burning wood fittings and coconut husks to stretch out their coal supply, which was down to 50 tons by the time she arrived on December 14th of 1914. Kormoran was not interned upon arrival, despite threats by the American governor to do so. but she also wasn't supplied with enough coal to depart, creating something of a standoff. When that governor was replaced, relations between the Americans and Germans became far better. The crew even became local celebrities. But their ship was still not allowed to leave. This standoff eventually came to an end on April 7th, 1917. The United States had declared war on Germany, and Kormoran was going to be formally seized and interned. The German crew objected to this and scuttled their ship. Kormoran sank to the bottom and was generally forgotten. Even the fact the first American shots of the war were fired at her launch. So forgotten that decades later, the Japanese moored a cargo ship, Tokai Maru, over the wreck site. They were occupying Guam at the time, though it wasn't as safe as it seemed. Tokai Maru had already been damaged once in Opera Harbor by a torpedo from USS Flying Fish. She was hit again on August 27, 1943, this time by USS Snapper, which sank the freighter, with her wreck coming to rest next to the much smaller Kormoran. The two ships are connected by Kormoran's stern, which actually damaged Tokai Maru as the Japanese ship sank. The two ships have, in the intervening years, become a popular diving spot. For, well, fairly obvious reason. How often can you see a wreck from World War I and a wreck from World War II at the same time, let alone resting against each other? Not to mention the relatively shallow depth of 120 feet or 37 meters at the bottom. Let's look at that now. I'll focus mostly on Kormoran here because Tokai Maru is a fairly average Japanese freighter wreck. She wouldn't be particularly notable if not for Kormoran. In any event, let's start here, with a 3D model of the two wrecks from the old Deep Sea Detectives episode on this shipwreck. And a side note before I go on. Am I the only one who misses that old show? I mean, yes, they had to dramatize things a lot, but it was always an interesting watch. In any case, you can immediately see the difference in size between these two wrecks. Kormoran was substantially older and smaller, dating back to 1909, while Tokai Maru was launched in 1930. That difference in size is apparent in this model, but also in drawings of the wreck site. I would imagine you can tell on the bottom as well, acknowledging the visibility limitations, of course, such as here, looking at the stern of Kormoran. It's certainly large, but Tokai Maru looms up in the background like a wall of steel. Both wrecks came down on their side, creating that effect today. However, the best indication of that size difference comes in the impact site. Tokai Maru's larger size is very apparent here, resting against the smaller Kormoran, with the side of the Japanese ship pressed to the stern of the German one, notably the propeller hub here. It's this area where the two wrecks collided as Tokai Maru sank. You can see some of that damage to the side in this picture, but the next one shows it better. That hole is easily seen here, a massive gash torn out of Tokai Maru's side. You can actually see inside the hull pretty well, although it's covered in silt. While a diver could probably fit inside there, it would be incredibly dangerous, and I imagine it's not allowed. Not that it's probably stopped some of the more adventurous types over the years. That aside, we can also see that prop hub once more. The actual propeller blades themselves are missing. Those either fell away in the sinking, in the collision, or were salvaged at some point. I've never read of the wreck being salvaged, but the missing screws and the lack of pictures of the guns leads me to believe she probably was. Regardless, let's move on. There aren't many good looks at the exterior of the wreck, although we have a pretty good one here. Kormoran looks decent enough for a wreck underwater for 90 years at that point. Most World War I wrecks are much worse, not least because of salvage. Kormoran may be in shallow water, but she's fortunate to be in Opera Harbor at Guam. In any event, there's not much to see here, just the side of the ship and what looks like the promenade deck, or an equivalent area. The next image is probably more interesting. This is a skylight over the engine room, though most of it is gone at this point. Only the frames remain, and even those are rusting out and covered in marine growth, with fairly notable holes nearby, clearly caused by the hull rusting out. I can only imagine how much worse that has gotten in the 20 years since these pictures were taken, because these were taken in the early 2000s. It's also our last exterior look. The remainder are going to be the interior. I'll do my best to describe things here, but a lot of this is so silty and deteriorated that I can't identify exact details, such as, for example, the first picture here. You can see the frames of the ship, but it's impossible to make out more. The damage is too severe, on top of all the silt and mud kicked up by the diver. The next picture is better in that regard, but still doesn't have much detail. We have a look down a passageway looking deeper into the hull. Kormoran is, once more, on her side, so everything here is sideways, and we're looking to the side, not down to the keel. It also makes diving inside this wreck even more dangerous than it otherwise would be. Kormoran isn't just aging and falling apart, but she's also on her side, making it a maze inside the ship. So most divers will focus on areas closer to the deck, such as this one looking out through rusted metal. There's a pile of debris here, along with the openings to the water. Unfortunately, what the debris was isn't particularly clear. This next picture is better in that we have a clearer look at the wreck, but much as with the others, there's not much detail. Kormoran is, for better or worse, a pretty empty wreck. Like I said earlier, I've never seen pictures of her weaponry, and as a converted freighter and ocean liner, she doesn't have turrets, torpedoes, or anything like that. What she does have, on the other hand, are interesting interior shots, like this one of a bathroom, with the tiles still in place and the pattern recognizable. The color has mostly faded out or been covered by silt, but you can still see the patterning in the tiles themselves. And in the same general area, we also have a tub, tilted to the side and surrounded by debris, but still intact and still in place. That's where civilian ships differ from military warships. You don't see things like this very often. Aside from those toilets on HMS Hermes, of course. That said, we're nearly at the end now. We have this picture of a stairwell with the railing still in place. This is presumably part of the engine room. With everything tilted to the side, it's hard to say for sure, although it certainly looks like something that would fit in that area. The last two pictures, meanwhile, are of two different anchors, one resting upright on the deck here. This doesn't look like it was Cormoran's. It seems to have come from a ship that moored here at some point, and that some point was quite a long time ago, judging from the marine growth. It's also resting inside the ship with the deck around it gone. The second anchor, meanwhile, is on its side. This might actually be from Cormoran herself from how old it looks. It's certainly rusty enough and covered by the marine life you'd expect, but I can't say for 100% certain. Still, it's a good place to round things off. Cormoran is an interesting wreck, both due to her age and Tokai Maru resting against her. But, for better or worse, she's not a well-recorded wreck, aside from dive videos on YouTube. Even now, she's still not as famous as other shipwrecks. A shame, really, considering her place in history. One of very few dual shipwrecks, and the place where the first American shots of the Great War were fired. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.